The lights on the Meridian did not go out all at once. They died slowly, one by one, like tired eyes closing down a long hallway. Cole Bennett watched them go from the lower deck, a wrench still in his hand, grease on his knuckles, and a cold feeling growing in his chest. He had felt the ship shudder a minute before. Now the deep hum of the jump drive was gone, and in its place was a silence so heavy it pressed against his ears. He was the only human on board, and he was used to being alone with the quiet, but this quiet was wrong. Above him, in the main corridor, alien voices began to rise. The crew of the Meridian were mostly Seathran, a tall and proud people with hard-scaled skin and slow, careful eyes. They did not panic easily, yet even they sounded worried now. Cole climbed the ladder toward the noise, wiping his hands on his coat, and stepped into a huddle of long shadows and low voices. Captain Rahel stood at the center of them. She was older than the rest, with a scar along one arm and a way of standing that made others go still. She turned as Cole came near, looked at him for half a second, and looked away again. To her, the human was cheap labor and little more. He fixed things, that was all he was for. "The drive is dead," she said to the crew, not to him. "We came out of the jump in the wrong place. There is no station near, no beacon within range. We are alone." The words fell like stones. Cole understood enough of their language to follow it. Alone, no station. He thought of the empty black outside the hull and felt very small. A younger Seathran, an engineer named Nima, spoke up. "How long to fix the drive?" Rahel's answer was flat. "Weeks, maybe more. We do not have every part. We will build what we can from what we have." Then she said the thing that made the whole corridor go quiet in a different way. "Until then, we ration. Every crew member gets less. Food goes to those who can work, who can repair, who can bring us home. That is the law of the strong. The strong survive, and by surviving, they save the rest." Around Cole, heads nodded. It did not sound cruel to them. It sounded like sense. The strong feed first so the strong can save everyone. That was how the Seathran had always lived, out here in the cold between stars. Cole nodded too, because it was not his place to argue, but something in him did not like the sound of it. He kept that to himself. He was good at keeping things to himself. The crew broke apart to their tasks. Cole was given the lowest one, as always. He was to check the cargo hold, log the seals, and make sure nothing had broken loose when the ship dropped out of the jump. He took a small light and went down alone. The hold was the oldest part of the Meridian. It smelled of metal and dust and old rope. Crates were stacked in long rows, tied down and forgotten. Cole moved along them slowly, checking each seal, reading each tag, and marking his little screen. Most of it was machine parts and dry goods, nothing that could feel fear the way he did. Then his light passed over something in the far corner that made him stop. It was a pod, a smooth, round thing the size of a large barrel, half hidden behind a stack of crates. Frost clung to its edges. A faint blue glow came from a small screen on its front. Cole had passed it 100 times before and never really looked. Cargo was cargo, but tonight the screen was showing a soft, steady pattern, a small line that rose and fell, rose and fell. He leaned closer and read the words beside it. His alien reading was slow, but he got there. Incubation pod, contents, 1 egg, species, Seathran, status, alive. Cole stared at the rising and falling line. It was a heartbeat, small and slow, but a heartbeat. There was a living thing in this hold, and no one had said a single word about it in the meeting upstairs. He looked around, as if someone might be watching, but he was alone. He checked the tag again. The pod was logged as low-priority cargo, just freight, just a thing to carry from one port to another. Whatever was inside, the crew did not seem to count it as one of their own. Cole put his hand flat against the cold surface of the pod. Through the frost and the metal, he could almost feel the tiny warmth on the other side, the way you can feel the sun through a closed window. Something small was in there, waiting to be born into a ship that was stranded, running low on food, with a captain who had just said that food went only to the strong. An egg could not work. An egg could not repair a drive. By Rahel's law, an egg was at the very bottom of the list. Cole took his hand away. He told himself it was not his problem. He was a deckhand. He fixed pipes and logged crates and stayed out of the way. He had enough to worry about with his own stomach, which was already tight and empty from the first cut in his rations. But as he turned to go, he looked back one more time at that small blue line rising and falling in the dark. He did not know it yet, but that little glow would change everything about the weeks to come and about the way a whole people would one day think of humans. For now, Cole only climbed the ladder back up, past the dying lights, to a cold bunk and a smaller meal than he was used to. He lay in the dark of the drifting ship and could not stop seeing the heartbeat. Somewhere below him, in a frozen pod, a Cethran child was getting ready to be born. A sharp crack woke the whole hold, and Cole was the only one there to hear it. He had come down early before his shift because he could not stop thinking about the pod. He told himself he was only checking the seals again. That was a lie, and he knew it. He had really come to look at the little heartbeat line one more time, but when he reached the corner, the sound stopped him cold. A crack, then another, coming from inside the frost-covered shell of the incubation pod. Cole dropped his light and caught it before it hit the floor. The blue screen on the front of the pod was flashing red now, and words scrolled fast across it that he could barely read. Feed cycle failed. Temperature dropping. Hatching in progress. The pod was breaking down. Whatever was inside was coming out early, and the machine that was meant to help it had died along with the rest of the ship. He should have run for the captain. That was the smart thing. Instead, his hands moved on their own, brushing frost off the seam of the pod, feeling for the release. The pod hissed. Cold air poured out, and then the lid lifted with a slow groan. Inside, curled on a bed of soft grey padding, was the smallest living thing Cole had ever seen. It was a Cethran hatchling, but nothing like the tall, hard crew above. It was pale and soft, no bigger than a house cat, with tiny folded wings pressed against its back and little claws that had not yet grown sharp. Its eyes were shut tight. It was shaking. The warm pod that should have held it safe was now as cold as the rest of the drifting ship. The hatchling opened its small mouth and made a sound. It was thin and high and full of need, and it went straight through Cole's chest like a needle. Without thinking, he pulled off his work coat and wrapped the little thing in it, holding it close against his own warmth. The shaking slowed. The tiny creature pushed its face into the cloth and cried again, softer this time, and Cole understood the cry the way anyone would. It was hungry. It had been born into the cold, and it was hungry, and there was no machine left to feed it. He carried it upstairs. The bridge went silent when he walked in with the bundle in his arms. Captain Rahel stood from her seat. Nima's mouth fell open. Dawn, the ship's medic, crossed the room in 3 long steps and looked down at the shaking shape in Cole's coat. The pod failed, Cole said. It hatched. The feeder is broken. It needs food. Real food, warm and soon. Dawn ran a small scanner over the hatchling. His face grew tight. It is early, he said. Days early. The pod was meant to feed it while it grew stronger. Now that is gone. It needs true feeding many times a day for weeks, or it will not live. Rahel looked at the little creature for a long moment. Then she looked at the food store readout on the wall, the numbers that told them exactly how little they had. Cole watched her do the maths behind her hard eyes, and he did not like where it was going. We are stranded, Rahel said slowly. We have food for the crew and only just. Every share we give away is a share taken from someone who can work, someone who can bring this ship home. She paused. The hatchling cannot work. It cannot repair. It cannot save us. By our law, it stands last in line, and the line is already too long. The words were quiet, but they were hard. She was not being cruel for fun. Cole could see that she hated saying it, but she was the captain. And she had a whole crew to keep alive, and Cethran law was clear. You did not weaken the strong to save the weak. That was how their people had survived the black for 1,000 years. You would let it starve, Cole said. It came out flat. I would not spend the lives of the many on the one who cannot be saved, Rahel answered. It is not the same thing. It is the harder thing. She turned away, which was her way of ending it. Log it as lost. See to your duties. The crew looked at the floor. No one argued with the captain. This was their way, and it had kept them breathing this long. Cole stood there with the warm, crying bundle in his arms, and he said nothing more, because he had learned long ago that arguing got him nowhere. But something had settled inside him, quiet and firm. In the moment, the little thing pushed its face into his coat. That night, when the corridors were empty and the crew were asleep in their bunks, Cole did not lie down. He carried the hatchling back to the hold, to the warmest corner near the engine wall where old heat still leaked through the metal. He set the bundle down gently. Then he took out his own ration for the day, the small pack of soft food that was meant to keep him going. He split it in half. One half he warmed against the engine wall, the way you might warm a stone in a fire. When it was soft and warm, he dipped his finger in it and held it to the hatchling's mouth. The little thing smelled it, opened its eyes for the first time, and latched on. It ate. It ate every warm drop off his finger, drop by drop, until the shaking stopped and it grew calm and heavy with sleep against his hand. Cole ate the other half himself, cold, in 3 small bites. It was not enough. His stomach still ached when he was done. He told himself it was only for tonight, only until they were rescued. He believed it, the way tired people believe kind lies. Then he leaned his head back against the warm wall, the sleeping hatchling curled in his palm, and he closed his eyes. He would learn its name later. For now, he only called it Little One, and he stayed awake a while longer, guarding a life the rest of the ship had already given up on. By the 10th day, Cole had learned to tell time by his own hunger. The ship had no proper day or night anymore, just dimmed lights to save power, so he stopped trusting the clocks. Instead, he trusted the ache in his belly, when it was a dull, low pull that meant morning and time to work. When it grew into a sharp, hollow thing that made his hands shake, that meant it was late, and the little one would be waiting. He had given the hatchling a small name by then. He called it Soul, because in the frozen dark of the hold, it had felt like the only warm thing left, like a tiny sun. Every night played out the same way. Cole worked his long shifts, carried his tools, fixed what the Seathran could not reach in the tight spaces of the ship. When the crew went to their bunks, he did not follow. He went down to the hold with most of his food still tucked in his coat, warmed it against the engine wall, and fed Sol drop by drop while the ship slept. Sol was growing, that was the wonder of it. Each night the hatchling seemed a little heavier, a little stronger. Its pale skin was turning a soft gray, closer to the color of the crew. Its wings were no longer just nubs but small folded fans that twitched when it was happy. Its eyes, when they opened, followed Cole's face and no other. It knew him now. When he came down the ladder, it would lift its head and make a soft, chirping sound, and something in his tired chest would lift with it. But every drop that went into Sol came out of Cole. He was careful about it at first, splitting his ration in half, then more than half. As the days went on and Sol needed more, the split changed. 2/3 to the baby, then most of it, then on the worst days, nearly all of it, with only a few cold bites left for himself. He told himself he could take it. He was bigger, he was older, he would eat properly once they were rescued. Sol could not wait, but he could. His body did not agree with his math. He grew thin in a way he tried to hide. His coat, once snug, now hung loose on his shoulders, so he pulled it tighter and hoped no one looked too close. His hands shook when he held his tools, so he learned to rest them on the metal to keep them steady. A deep cold settled into him that no amount of engine heat could chase away, and he found himself sitting down more, just for a moment, between tasks, catching his breath before he stood again. The Seathran noticed none of it, and the reason cut Cole in a quiet way. They already thought humans were soft. When they saw him tired, when they saw him thin, they simply nodded to themselves. Soft, weak, a small, frail creature that could not take the hard life of the black the way a Seathran could. One of them said it out loud one morning, not unkindly, just as a fact, as Cole leaned against a wall to steady himself. The human fades, they are not built for the long dark, and they moved on. Cole let them believe it. It was easier than the truth. If they knew the truth, they would take Sol's food away and give it to someone who could work, and Sol would starve. So he wore his weakness like a coat over a secret, and he said nothing, and he kept feeding the baby. There was one person he could not fool so easily. Nima, the young engineer, was sharp in a way the others were not. She was the one who handed out the ration tokens each cycle and marked them off. And she began to notice a strange thing. Cole always spent his tokens, every single one, right on time. He was clearly getting his full share of food from the store, and yet cycle after cycle, he was not getting stronger on it. He was getting thinner. A person who eats their full share should hold their weight, even on short rations. Cole was not holding his. She did not say anything, but she started watching him. She saw how he carried his food away instead of eating it in the mess hall with the others. She saw how he swayed on his feet at the end of a shift. She filed it all away, quiet and careful, the way a good engineer files away a small strange reading that does not fit the rest. Cole did not know she was watching. He was too tired to notice much of anything by then, except Sol. The bond between them had grown into the one bright thing in his whole grey world. When he came down to the hold, aching and hungry and cold, Sol would climb into his lap on its own, warm as a coal, and press against his chest, and for a little while nothing else mattered. Sol trusted him completely. It did not know that the food came at a cost. It only knew that when the tall, soft one came down the ladder, it was warm, and it was safe, and it was fed. To Sol, Cole was the whole world, the giver of heat and food and comfort, the one steady thing in a cold and drifting ship. That trust was what kept Cole going when his body wanted to quit. One night near the end of that stretch, he was crossing the high catwalk over the engine room, carrying Sol's warmed food when the world tipped sideways. His knees went soft. The rail rushed up toward him. He caught it just in time, both hands white on the metal, his heart hammering, black spots swimming in his eyes. For a long moment he just hung there, breathing, not sure if he would fall. Then from below he heard a small chirp. Sol, waiting in the warm corner, calling for him. Cole steadied himself. He wiped the cold sweat from his face. He picked up the food he had nearly dropped, and he made his slow way down, one step at a time, hand over hand. "Coming, little one," he whispered to the dark. "The baby eats today. That makes it a good day." He believed it too, even like this, even starving. As long as Sol was fed, it was a good day, and he lay down that night with an empty stomach and a full heart, and he did not once think of himself as brave. Nima made her choice the night she could not sleep. The strange reading about the human would not leave her alone. A crew member who ate his full share should not fade like a dying candle. Numbers did not lie, and these numbers did not add up. So instead of lying in her bunk staring at the ceiling, she rose in the quiet hours when even the captain slept, and she went to find out where Cole Bennett went each night with his food. She followed him from a distance, keeping to the shadows of the corridor, her steps soft on the metal. She watched him climb down into the old cargo hold. She waited, counting her own breaths, then crept to the top of the ladder and looked down. What she saw made her go very still. Cole sat in the warm corner by the engine wall, and curled in his lap was the hatchling, the one Rahul had ordered logged as lost. It was not lost. It was alive, and it was bigger, and it was pressed happily against the human's chest. In his hand, Cole held his own ration. Warmed soft, and he was feeding it to the little creature drop by drop off his finger, the way a person feeds a child. And while he fed it, his own stomach growled so loud in the quiet hold that Nima heard it from the top of the ladder. It growled, and he did not eat. He gave every last bit to the baby, and when the food was gone, he had nothing left for himself. Nima understood then, all at once, what the numbers had been telling her for days. Cole was not eating his share. He had not eaten a full meal in a very long time. He was starving himself, slowly and on purpose, and hiding it, so that a creature that was not even his own kind would not go hungry. She did not shout. She backed up the ladder, turned, and ran for the medic. Dawn came fast, and behind him came the captain, and behind her came half the sleepy crew, drawn by the strange midnight rush. They gathered at the mouth of the hold and looked down, and one by one they went silent, and the silence was a heavy thing. Cole looked up, caught in the light of their lamps, half his face lit and half in shadow. Sol was warm and content in his lap, its belly full, its eyes half closed. For a moment no one spoke at all. The crew simply stared at the thin, shaking human they had all agreed was weak, giving away the very food that was keeping him alive, to a life they had already thrown away. Rahul came down the ladder first. She stood over him, tall and hard, and her voice was low. "You were told the hatchling was lost." "It wasn't lost," Cole said. His voice was rough and quiet. "It was just hungry. You have been feeding it your own share." It was not a question. She could see it now, all of it, the loose coat, the thin face, the shaking hands. For how long? since it hatched. A sound went through the watching crew, a low murmur of shock. To them, this was not a kind act. It was a thing that made no sense at all. Among the Seathran, you did not weaken the strong to save the weak. You did not give your own strength, your own survival, to a helpless thing that could give you nothing back. It broke the oldest law they had, the law that had carried their people through 1,000 years of cold dark. What Cole had done was not, in their eyes, brave. It was almost like a sickness of the mind. A creature that starves itself for a stranger's child. It frightened them a little because they had no shape to fit it into. Why, Rahul demanded, and there was real anger in it, and under the anger something she could not name. You are crew, you can work, you can bring us home, that one cannot. By every law we have, your life is worth more than its life. Why would you spend yourself on it? Cole was too tired to make it clever. He just told the plain truth, the way any human would. Because it's a baby, he said, and it was hungry, and I wasn't going to sit there eating while it starved next to me. He looked up at her, and his eyes were steady even though his body was not. I don't understand why that needs a reason. Where I'm from, you feed the baby, that's all. You just feed the baby. The words were simple. They landed in the hold like a stone in still water, and the ripples went out through every Seathran standing there. You just feed the baby. As if it were the most obvious thing in the world. As if there were nothing strong or weak about it at all, only a hungry small one and a full-grown one who had food. Dawn knelt and ran his scanner over Cole, and his face changed as he read it. He looked up at the captain, and his voice was very quiet. Captain, he is not far from real harm. His body is running on almost nothing. Days more of this, maybe less, and we would not have been logging the hatchling as lost. He swallowed. We would have been logging him. The silence after that was different. It was not shock anymore. It was something closer to shame. Rahul looked down at the human, thin and cold and shaking, with the well-fed hatchling curled, trusting in his lap. She looked at Sol, alive and growing, a life that by her own order should have been dead 10 days ago, saved by nothing but the quiet, stubborn kindness of the smallest, softest member of her crew. She thought of her law, the hard, clean law of the strong, and for the first time in her long life, it did not feel clean. It felt like it had a hole in it, a hole shaped exactly like the thing sitting in front of her, the thing her people had no word for. She did not speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice had lost its edge. Bring him up, she said softly. Bring them both up, and bring food. They put a full plate in front of Cole in the mess hall, and for a moment, he only looked at it. It had been so long since he had eaten a real meal that his tired mind almost did not know what to do with it. Warm food, a full share, no need to hide it or split it or save it for the little one in the dark. The crew stood around him in a loose circle, not saying much, watching him the way you watch something you are trying to understand. Sol sat on the table beside his hand, fed and warm and half asleep, its small tail curled around his wrist. Eat, Rahul said. It was an order, but a gentle one, all of it. That is a command from your captain. Cole ate, his hands still shook, but they steadied as the warmth spread through him. And while he ate, the Seathran did the hardest thing their kind ever did. They changed their minds. It began with Dawn, who spoke first, slow and careful, working it out as he said it. We have always believed the strong must survive so the strong can save the rest. It is a good law, it has kept us alive. He looked at Cole, then at the sleeping hatchling. But this human is not strong by our meaning. He is small and soft, and he faded near to death. And yet he did the thing that saved a life we had given up on. He did it with nothing but his own hunger. That is not weakness. I do not have a word for what it is, but it is not weakness. Nima spoke next, quiet but sure. We looked at him, and we saw a frail creature that could not last the dark. We were wrong. It takes a harder strength to starve yourself for weeks for a stranger's child than it does to eat your fill and call it survival. We just never learned to see that kind of strength, because we never had it to look at. The crew was silent, and in the silence, something old cracked and let light through. Rahul stood at the head of the table. She had led this crew a long time, and she had never once bent the law of the strong, because bending it had always looked like weakness to her. But she looked now at the human eating his first full meal in weeks, and at the child breathing softly beside him, alive against every rule she had, and she understood that her law had a blind spot the size of a hatchling. It knew how to save the strong. It had never learned how to carry the helpless. And a people who could not carry their own helpless were not as strong as they thought. They were only lucky until the day they were not. I made a wrong call, Rahul said. The words were not easy for her and everyone knew it, and that was why they mattered. I ordered a life logged as lost because it could not repay us. I was following our law, but our law forgot something and this human remembered it for us. She set her hand flat on the table. New order. The hatchling is fed from the shared store by all of us until it can feed itself, and no one on my ship goes hungry alone again while others eat. Not the smallest. Not the softest, not one. We carry our own, all of them. No, Cethran argued. A few of them looked almost relieved, as if they had wanted to feel this way for a long time and had never been given leave to. But the Black does not care about kind moments, and the ship was still stranded, still drifting, still running down. That problem had not gone anywhere, and it was solved in the end by the same stubborn human in the strangest way. While Cole ate, Nima sat beside him and asked, just to keep him talking, how he had kept the little one's food warm every night in a hold with no working heater. Cole told her, tired and plain, that he had learned which part of the engine wall still leaked old heat, a narrow seam near the lower housing where warmth bled through even when everything else was cold and dead. He had used it like a stove. It was the only warm spot left on the ship. Nima went very still. Warm when everything else was cold and dead, that seam was still warm. That meant heat was still moving there. That meant a line the crew had marked as fully dead was not dead at all, only blocked, venting its heat in the wrong place. And if it could be turned, if that trapped heat could be pushed back where it belonged, it might be exactly the thing they needed to restart the drive that had failed for want of a working heat line. She grabbed Dawn. Dawn grabbed the tools. Within the hour-half, the crew was down in the hold at the engine wall, at the very spot where Cole had knelt each night to warm a baby's food, and there they found it. A vent choked shut in the jump. The human's cold nights had led them straight to the one thing that could bring them home. He had found it without ever knowing, just by looking for somewhere warm to feed a child. They worked through what passed for night. Cole slept through most of it, finally, deeply, for the first time in weeks, a full meal in him at last. And as the crew cleared the vent and coaxed the old heat back into its proper line, one small thing happened that none of them would ever forget. Sol woke, climbed down off the table, and made its slow way across the mess hall floor on its little claws. It passed Dawn, who offered it food. It passed Nima, who reached for it. It ignored them both. It went straight to Cole, where he slept, climbed up into his lap, and settled there against his chest, exactly where it had learned that warmth and safety lived. The crew watched it happen, a Cethran hatchling choosing, and it had not chosen one of its own kind. It had chosen the human. The first Cethran child ever known to imprint on a member of another species had picked the soft, stubborn creature who went to bed hungry so that it would not. Then the drive coughed, caught, and rose back to its deep and living hum, and the Meridian was no longer a dead thing in the dark. It was a ship again, pointed home, with a full crew, a fed child, and a captain who had learned, very late, a thing the smallest one aboard had known all along. The port at Haven Reach saw 1,000 ships come and go, and it thought it had seen everything, until the Meridian limped in with a human asleep in the medical bay and a dragon child that would not leave his side. Word travels fast in a docking ring. Crews talk to crews, and stories jump from ship to ship faster than any message beam. By the time Cole was well enough to walk on his own 2 feet again, the tale had already spread past the Meridian and out into the wider black. People spoke of it in mess halls and cargo bays and quiet bridges all across that part of the star lanes. A stranded ship, a dying child. And a lone human who had gone to bed hungry, night after night, for weeks, so that a baby not of his blood, not of his kind, not able to give him a single thing back, would not go hungry too. To many species out there, that story did not make sense at first, the same way it had not made sense to the Cethran. Survival was survival. You looked after your own. You did not spend your own life on a stranger's child. And yet the story stuck, because it did something to the ones who heard it. It reached into a soft place they did not always admit they had, and it pressed there gently, and it did not let go. The Cethran themselves were the ones it changed most. They were an old people with old laws, and they did not change those laws lightly. But when the Meridian's crew told what had happened, told it plainly, without dressing it up, the elders of their kind listened, and then they were quiet for a long time. Here was a truth they could not argue away. Their law of the strong had ordered a child dead. A soft outsider had refused the order with nothing but his own empty stomach, and he had been right, and their law had been wrong. That was not a thing a proud people enjoy admitting, but the Cethran, whatever else they were honest. And so they did a thing they had not done in a very long time. They changed a law. The new words were short, and they spread to every Cethran ship and world. The helpless are to be carried, not culled. No child of ours, and no child in our care, is to be left to starve because it cannot yet repay us. We were shown this by an outsider. We will not need to be shown it twice. They wrote it down, and in the small record beside it, where the reason for a change is kept, they wrote of a human deckhand who had thought he was doing nothing special at all. That was the part Cole could never quite understand. When the captain told him what his people had done, he only shook his head, embarrassed. He had not set out to change anyone's laws. He had not set out to be a story. He had just seen a baby that was hungry, and he had food, so he fed it, and he kept feeding it, because stopping was never something he really thought about. To him, it was the plainest thing in the world. To half the galaxy, it became the measure of what humans were. And that was the quiet lesson the Black learned from him. Not that humans were fierce, or clever, or strong in the way that wins fights. There were fiercer species, and cleverer ones. What set the humans apart was smaller and harder to name, and in the end, worth more. They would not let the small ones go without. Give a human a hungry child and an empty cupboard, and the human would find a way to make the child eat, even if it cost them their own share, even if no one was watching, even if there was nothing in it for them at all. A people like that were people you could trust with your weak, your young, your helpless. And in a cold and dangerous galaxy, there was no reputation more valuable than that. Haven Reach was where the Meridian's crew rested and repaired and took on new stock. And it was there, on the docking ring, that Captain Rahul found Cole one evening looking out at the ships. "You could leave here," she said, "find a human port, go home." Cole thought about it. Then he looked down at Sol, who was bigger now, walking on its own, its wings almost full-grown, its tail wrapped as always around his ankle. It had not left his side since the night it chose him. It slept where he slept and followed where he went and cried when he was gone too long. "I don't think I'd get very far," Cole said, and there was warmth in it. "Somebody has to feed this one." Rahul almost smiled, which for a Cethran was a rare and serious thing. "Then stay," she said, "not as hired labor, not as the human we keep below, stay as crew, my crew. You have earned that name more than any deckhand I have ever known." It was the first time she had called him crew and meant every part of it. Cole heard it. He nodded, and that was that. The Meridian left Haven Reach a few cycles later, drives humming, hold full, pointed out toward the next long run through the dark. And on that first evening back in the black, Cole sat in the mess hall with the whole crew around him and a full plate in front of him, and out of an old, deep habit he could not break, he reached down and split his meal in half to warm the smaller portion for the little one. But Sol was not so little anymore, and Sol was not hungry, because Sol had already been fed by 6 different crew members who now fought over the honor. So the dragon child, grown and warm and safe, looked at the half-meal Cole had set aside out of habit, and pushed it gently back across the table toward him with its snout. The whole crew was watching. They had learned to watch this human closely because he taught them things without meaning to. Cole looked at the food pushed back toward him. Then he looked around the table at the faces of the crew, hard-scaled and proud, and now quietly kind, every one of them making sure with their eyes that this time he would eat. So he did. He ate his whole meal, warm and full, with a dragon curled against his side and a ship full of people who would never again let one of their own go to bed hungry. And somewhere far behind them, on 100 worlds, a story kept traveling from ship to ship in the dark, teaching the galaxy, one telling at a time, exactly what kind of creature a human was.